Looking back, I can't pinpoint the exact moment things started feeling wrong, but if I had to choose, it would be those late nights when I'd half wake, expecting to see Kira asleep beside me like before. Lately, though, she was often turned away, her face illuminated by that irritating phone screen. It might sound trivial, but there was a time I would have done anything just to see her smile, to see her happy. Now it was like I was looking at a stranger who happened to have my wife's face. Her grin wasn't the gentle one she used to share with me. It was sharper, like she was sharing a private joke with someone else, one I'd never hear. I didn't want to be that husband, the one who invents problems from thin air, but night after night, there she was, lost in her own world, fingers flying across the screen. I'd turn away and pretend to sleep, but each time, I felt her slipping further away. Kira used to tell me everything. Sure, we had our issues like any other couple, but there wasn't a time when she didn't share her day with me, even the boring parts. But suddenly every conversation felt filtered. She'd throw out these shallow excuses like, "Oh, just the girls again," or "Sorry, it's work." I'd nod along, trying not to overthink it, but after being with someone so long, you know when they're hiding something. Maybe it wasn't outright lies, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Every night out with the girls just added to the feeling in my gut that something was wrong. Then came a night that's burned into my memory. I'd woken up around 2 a.m., and there she was, laughing at something on her phone. I didn't have to look twice. She was beaming, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in ages. I just lay there, pretending to sleep but feeling more alert than I had in weeks. Who was making her smile like that? I wanted to reach over, grab her phone and demand the truth right then, but I kept asking myself if I was just being paranoid. I didn't have any concrete proof, just my own doubts, right? Things started shifting between us in ways I hadn't imagined. She was always too tired or not in the mood. I get it. Life wears you down, but this wasn't just a rough patch. She'd pull away, like even being near me was too much. Every time I tried to talk about it, she'd brush it off, like I was the one imagining things. But I knew I wasn't. The woman I loved was right beside me, but every night she felt more distant. It was the little things adding up. One day, she mentioned some inside joke she had with work friends. I sat there trying to act like everything was fine, but when I asked her to explain it, she clammed up. I saw it, she didn't want me in on the joke. Then, one day, I caught her laughing at a private message that popped up. When I asked what was funny, she just smiled, shrugged, and changed the topic. That's when it hit me. I wasn't just feeling like an outsider, she was making me one. One of the strangest parts was how even my friends started noticing things. Sam, one of my oldest buddies from work, casually mentioned seeing her around town with some guy he thought he recognized. Sam's the kind of guy who wouldn't dig even if he stumbled onto something, so he laughed it off, saying he must have been mistaken. But that offhand remark hit me hard. From then on, every time Kira had an excuse to be away, every girls' night or late work meeting, my mind went to dark places. Who was she really with? Then, as if fate was dropping hints I didn't want, things got even stranger. What really set me off was Juan. He was always a bit too friendly with Kira, a little too quick to grab her a drink at gatherings, and he laughed at her jokes like she was the funniest person in the room. But it wasn't until one weekend that I truly started to wonder. We were out with friends, and I noticed Juan's eyes lingering on her a bit too long. He'd hover, listen too intently, laugh too loudly. It was subtle, but once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. Suddenly, every look, every shared laugh between them felt like a blow to the gut. I wasn't ready to accept it yet, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. After seeing how attentive Juan was, I wondered if I was the only one noticing. Surely someone else had seen the way he stuck to Kira like some over-eager sidekick. And then, it hit me. Lena, his wife. She was always around, and I couldn't help but wonder if she'd noticed the same things I had. For a while I kept the thoughts to myself. Bringing it up with her felt risky. I didn't know if she'd seen anything or if I'd end up looking like a paranoid fool. But that nagging feeling wouldn't leave me alone. Finally, I decided to reach out. One afternoon, I sent her a casual text. "Hey, you've noticed Juan and Kira seem pretty close, right?" I tried to keep it light, just in case. Her response was almost immediate. "Funny, I was just thinking the same thing." My heart pounded. What began as casual texts about their behavior soon turned serious. With every message, it was like peeling back layers on this tangled mess we were both caught in. I could sense that she was as frustrated and in the dark as I was. And oddly enough, it was a comfort to know I wasn't losing my mind alone. Lena and I started texting regularly after that. It was strange. This silent understanding between us. We both felt isolated, trapped in marriages where something was obviously wrong, but neither of us could quite put a finger on exactly what. Our conversations soon turned into a shared secret between us. Lena would tell me about Juan's late meetings and work dinners, while I'd share Kira's excuses for girls' nights that just happened to always line up with Juan's outings. Each little story felt like another clue in a puzzle neither of us was sure we wanted to finish. But we were past the point of choice. Then came the night it all came crashing down. Around 8 p.m. Lena texted, saying Juan had just left for another work meeting. The timing was spot on. Kira had just informed me she'd be working late too. My stomach twisted with the realization that this might be our chance to finally uncover the truth. Lena and I agreed to meet up and follow them. It felt ridiculous, like something from a bad detective movie, but I needed answers. We met near Kira's office and watched from a distance. Less than 10 minutes later, Kira emerged, looking around nervously before getting into Juan's car. The sight was like a punch to the gut. We followed them silently as they drove across town to a hotel. Watching them go in together, laughing, was surreal. Lena was just as stunned as I was. I could see the pain etched on her face as she broke down, shoulders shaking with sobs. I was furious, but I forced myself to hold it together and tried to comfort her instead. Inside, though, I wanted to hit something, to let out the rage boiling inside me. Sitting in that car with Lena, both of us swallowed by silence and heartbreak, felt like some twisted bond between us. We knew we needed undeniable proof. I snapped photos of Kira and Juan leaving the hotel together. Holding my phone to frame the shots, I felt like I was betraying the life we'd built over the years. There I was, capturing my wife's affair on camera, documenting the end of my marriage in real time. When Lena looked over at me, her expression was a mix of hurt and determination. We both understood. These images would be our defense when it came time to confront them. That night, sleep was impossible. My mind kept replaying every detail. Kira's smile as she got into Juan's car, their shared laughter, and Lena's tear-streaked face beside me. It all felt wrong, like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. Kira came home hours later, tiptoeing through the door. I lay there, pretending to be asleep, not ready to face her without those pictures to ground me. The next morning I tried to casually bring up her late night, keeping my voice steady as I poured coffee. "So, how was work last night?" I asked, as if everything was normal. She barely looked at me, brushing off the question with, "Oh, just the usual." But there was a flicker in her eyes. I knew she was lying. When I pressed further, she snapped, asking why I was being so nosy. Her irritated tone and the way she looked at me like I was a nuisance rather than her husband only fueled my anger. But I kept my cool, not ready to reveal what I knew. I just nodded, pretending to accept her excuse, even though every fiber of my being wanted to confront her, to throw those photos in her face and show her the hurt she'd caused. But something held me back. Maybe it was Lena and the quiet plan we'd started piecing together after that night. From then on, Lena and I couldn't let it go. We texted each other constantly, venting, sharing every small betrayal we'd noticed over the years, slowly uncovering just how deep this affair ran. We knew that simply confronting them wouldn't be enough, not after everything we'd witnessed. We wanted them to feel the same sting of betrayal, to live with the dread of knowing we knew but not knowing when the other shoe would drop. We agreed to meet in person somewhere private, where we could speak openly. I chose a secluded spot at a park on the edge of town, a place no one we knew would likely visit. When Lena arrived, I saw that same fire in her eyes that had been burning in me for days. We sat together on a bench overlooking a pond, and the surreal nature of it all hit me. Here I was, with Juan's wife, planning how to expose my own wife's betrayal. We tossed around ideas for how we'd confront them. Should we do it at a family gathering, or maybe drop subtle hints until they cracked under the pressure? Every suggestion sounded like something from a cheap soap opera, yet there we were, laughing at the absurdity of it. We shared stories of Kira and Juan's ridiculous excuses, the times we'd caught them in lies, and the moments we'd caught convincing ourselves they were telling the truth, even when we knew deep down they weren't. In the midst of all the anger and frustration, there was something else. Sitting there with Lena, her shoulder occasionally brushing against mine, her laughter filling the quiet, I felt a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. Going through this kind of betrayal together either tears you apart or creates a strange bond. It wasn't planned, and it was far from wise, but before I knew it, we leaned in, sharing a kiss that was raw and filled with a mix of anger and desperation. It was as though all the hurt and betrayal we'd bottled up finally had a release. We didn't talk about it afterward. There wasn't much to say. But from that moment, it felt like we were truly in this together, and nothing would stop us from seeing it through. Our first real move happened at a dinner with our usual friends. Kira and I arrived together, playing the role of the happy couple, as fake as it felt. Across the table I spotted Lena, her expression calm, collected, almost too calm. At one point in the evening she casually mentioned to the group, I've always had a talent for sensing when someone's hiding something. She let the words linger, looking around with a knowing smile. I watched as Juan shifted uncomfortably and glanced at Kira, who suddenly looked like she'd swallowed something sour. Seeing them squirm brought a small surge of satisfaction. A few friends noticed the strange vibe, exchanging glances as if sensing something amiss. No one asked outright, but I could tell some were starting to suspect. That was exactly the atmosphere we wanted. A hint of paranoia, just enough to unsettle them. Lena even took it further, planning a casual get-together with some mutual friends. The plan was simple. Drop just enough hints to keep Kira and Juan uneasy without outright exposing them. Throughout the evening, Lena slipped in small remarks, barely noticeable to anyone unfamiliar with the truth, but enough to make our cheating spouses squirm. "It's funny," she'd say, "how some people think they can keep secrets forever, but the truth always has a way of coming out." Each time Kira's smile would waver, and Juan would quickly excuse himself to refill his drink or look away. It didn't take long for our friends to notice the unusual tension. A few even asked if everything was all right between Kira and me, and I'd just shrug, saying we were going through a rough patch. It was a simple answer that planted the idea in their heads, making them watch a little closer. That was the beauty of our strategy. The more we prolonged it, the more everyone around would start to see the cracks, even if they didn't know why. The real test, though, came during a double date Lena and I arranged with Kira and Juan. It was a bold, risky move, but we wanted them to sweat, to feel the walls closing in. We chose a small, cozy restaurant, perfect for intimate dinners, and from the moment we arrived, the tension was thick. Lena and I played our parts flawlessly, acting casual but adding just enough suggestive glances and subtle hints to make them wonder what we knew. At one point, Lena leaned over to Juan, her voice just loud enough for Kira and me to hear, and said, "It's strange, isn't it, how some things just don't stay hidden forever? It's almost like fate insists the truth come out." Juan froze, his face going pale as he exchanged a nervous look with Kira, who stared at her plate, visibly rattled. I could feel her struggling to hold herself together. The rest of the night became a game of psychological warfare. Every glance, every carefully chosen word was meant to unnerve them, to make them feel as if the world was closing in. I watched Kira's anxious glances at Juan, the way she fidgeted with her napkin, and it took all my willpower not to laugh. They were both on edge, and it was exactly what they deserved. By the end of the night, Lena and I had them pushed to their limits without uttering a single explicit word about what we knew. They left the restaurant looking like they'd been through a storm, and I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of satisfaction. The party was perfect for the next phase of our plan, a large gathering of friends and family, exactly the kind of event where Whispers could take on a life of their own. Lena and I arrived separately, keeping our distance initially, acting as though we were just two people in the same room. But we had a plan, and tonight we were done with subtle hints. This time we were done with subtle hints. This time we were turning up the pressure. The first move came from Lena. She drifted into a conversation with Kira and a few friends, and I watched from across the room as she began her story, her expression one of casual curiosity. "Oh, I heard the craziest story," she said, loud enough to draw in a few more people. "My friend recently found out her husband was cheating on her. She had no idea for years and just stumbled upon the proof." Kira's reaction was almost too good. I could see her hands fidgeting and her eyes darting around as she forced a tight smile. Lena continued, detailing how the friend uncovered everything, and Kira grew visibly paler with each word. She glanced over at Juan across the room, and I could see the question in her eyes. Was this just coincidence, or was Lena onto her? But that was only the beginning. Later in the evening, I made sure to plant my own seed of doubt. Kira approached me to ask something, and as I unlocked my phone in front of her, I made a show of scrolling, casually letting her see a photo of her and Juan leaving the hotel together. I moved past it quickly, acting as if it were just any other picture. But I saw her face freeze, her gaze locked on the screen. I pretended not to notice, slipping my phone back into my pocket and continuing the conversation as if nothing had happened. The rest of the party was like watching a disaster unfold in slow motion. I saw Kira whispering urgently to Juan, her face tense as she tried to keep her voice down. Across the room, Lena and I exchanged knowing glances and small smiles, fueling their anxiety without saying a word. Friends began to notice the strange vibe, and a couple came over asking if everything was okay between Kira and me. I just shrugged, casually hinting that we'd been going through a rough time. It was technically true, but vague enough to keep the gossip going. Every exchanged look, every slight touch between Lena and me stoked the rumors, and soon enough the room was buzzing with quiet questions and whispers that Kira and Juan couldn't ignore. Lena didn't hold back either. At one point she found herself alone with Juan in the kitchen. I didn't catch every word, but I saw enough to know it was effective. She leaned in close, her voice low as she murmured something that left him visibly shaken, his face drained of color. I overheard her hinting that she knew more than she was letting on. Juan shot her a panicked look, quickly glancing around and making sure no one else was listening. After that, he practically clung to Kira's side, pulling her into hushed conversations and nervously scanning the room as if expecting someone to leap out and expose them at any moment. Watching them come undone was almost too enjoyable. With each passing glance between Lena and me, they grew more rattled, as if the ground beneath them was crumbling. By the end of the night, we had pushed them to the brink without even confronting them directly. As the party began to wind down, Lena and I decided to turn up the jealousy factor. We'd both noticed how Kira and Juan couldn't take their eyes off us, watching every interaction with growing discomfort. So, I leaned in a bit closer to Lena, laughing at something she said, and letting my hand rest casually on her shoulder. She played along perfectly, tilting her head toward me and letting her hand linger on my arm, just enough to stoke Kira and Juan's suspicions, making them wonder if we'd moved on to each other in the process. I caught Kira staring, her expression a mix of shock and anger. When our eyes met, she quickly looked away, attempting to mask her reaction. Juan didn't fare much better. He looked like he was on the verge of confronting us, but each time he took a step in our direction, he'd stop, his confidence fading. They were both too afraid to cause a scene, too unsure of what we knew and what we'd do next. As we left the party, Lena gave me one last look, a smirk that said we'd accomplished exactly what we'd set out to do. Kira and Juan were left entangled in a mess they'd created, filled with paranoia, confusion, and completely thrown off balance. The family gathering was the moment we'd been working toward, a final reveal meticulously planned, fueled by the betrayal and anger that had built up inside us. Kira and I arrived separately, as did Lena and Juan, each of us blending into the crowd as best we could. But we knew that by the end of the evening, all eyes would be on them. As the night wore on, my heart pounded, knowing the moment was near. The room was full of relatives, close friends, and people who'd known Kira and me for years. Standing there, realizing I was about to detonate a bomb that would change everything, felt surreal. When the time felt right, I cleared my throat, took a deep breath, and spoke up. "Hey, everyone," I said loudly enough for the entire room to fall silent, drawing every eye to me. I saw Kira across the room, confusion mixed with a flash of dread on her face, while Juan stood beside her, his forced smile slipping. "I know this isn't what anyone expected tonight," I continued, forcing my voice to stay calm. "But there's something I need to share." The tension in the room escalated as I saw Kira reach for Juan's hand, both of them bracing for the worst. For the past several months, Kira and Juan have been having an affair. Gasps swept across the room, followed by a stunned silence. I pulled out my phone, my hand steady as I held up the screen, with clear photos of them leaving a hotel together, proof that erased any lingering doubts. Slowly, I flipped through each image, ensuring everyone saw exactly what Kira and Juan had been doing behind our backs. The silence in the room was palpable as Kira's face went pale and she stumbled backward, speechless. Juan looked equally shocked, opening and closing his mouth, searching for words that wouldn't come. Then Lena stepped forward, her voice trembling yet resolute. "I just want everyone to know how much this has hurt," she said, her eyes glossy with unshed tears. "Juan was my husband, my partner, and he destroyed everything we had." She held up her own phone, displaying damning text messages, each one adding to their shame and painting a vivid picture of betrayal that no one could turn away from. Reactions rippled through the room as relatives exchanged horrified glances, friends shook their heads in disgust, and a few old friends even openly chastised them. "How could you do this to Randall? To Lena?" someone demanded, while another muttered, "I can't believe I trusted you both." I watched as Kira's expression shifted from shock to disbelief, then anger, and finally desperation. She approached me, her eyes wide, pleading. "Randall, please," she whispered, grabbing my arm. "We can work through this. It didn't mean anything." I let her words hang in the air, hollow and meaningless. Her grip tightened, but I stayed still, meeting her eyes with a strange sense of calm. "It's over, Kira. I'm done," I replied, my voice firm and final. Kira's face crumpled as she broke down, and I felt a brief pang of pity, but it was buried beneath too much anger, too much betrayal. Across the room, Juan was trying his own damage control, moving from friend to friend, muttering excuses, but it was useless. People turned away, faces cold and unforgiving. His desperation was almost pitiful, but I couldn't bring myself to care. He was reaping the consequences of his choices, and no amount of pleading would salvage what he'd destroyed. By the end of the night, Kira and Juan were left standing alone, shunned by nearly everyone present. Lena and I walked out together into the cool night air, leaving them to face the aftermath of their actions. There was nothing more to say. The truth was finally out, and we had reclaimed control. In the weeks that followed that unforgettable gathering, everything in my life took on a newfound clarity. It felt like a veil had been lifted, exposing the raw truth I had been avoiding for far too long. Lena and I, bruised and broken, had come out on the other side, and against all odds, we found something real in each other. It was an unexpected twist, almost poetic. Two people, abandoned and betrayed, discovering one another not through love, but through shared pain. One evening we sat together on my porch, the warm air settling around us as we watched the sun dip below the horizon. It had been a quiet day, one of those rare peaceful moments that had become almost foreign to me. As we talked about everything and nothing, the conversation took a more serious turn. We spoke about our future, not just what we envisioned for the next few years, but our dreams, our hopes, the things we had let slip away while trapped in our broken marriages. Lena looked out at the fading colors of the sunset, her voice soft, yet certain. "We've both got a second chance here," she said. "And I don't want to waste it." "I want something real this time," she said, her voice filled with a vulnerability that struck a chord deep inside me. In that moment I realized I wanted the same thing. We spent hours talking into the night about what truly mattered to us now. Trust and honesty sat at the core of it all. We had both witnessed firsthand how secrets could eat away at even the strongest relationships, so by the time dawn was approaching, we'd made a promise to each other. Whatever the future held, we'd keep things transparent, even when the truth was tough to face. Meanwhile, Kira wasn't ready to let go. She came to my door a couple of times as though she believed she could somehow undo the wreckage she'd left behind. The first time, she stood there, looking exhausted, her face streaked with fresh tears. "Randall, please," she began, her voice shaking. "Can we talk? I made a mistake, I know I did, but can we fix this?" Looking at her, all I felt was a strange emptiness. Her desperation, her apologies, they didn't stir me as they once would have. Instead, they felt hollow, like she was reciting lines she didn't believe. She rambled about regret, insisting it meant nothing, and that we could rebuild if I'd give her another chance. But when she finally stopped, waiting for a response, I could only say, "Kira, it's over. There's nothing left to fix." Her face fell, and for a fleeting second, I almost felt a touch of pity. Almost. But the betrayal ran too deep, the damage too severe. After that, she tried to reach me through messages, her tones swinging from pleading to accusatory. Initially, it was more apologies and promises to change, but when I didn't respond, bitterness seeped into her words. She even began blaming me, as if somehow my actions had driven her to Wand. It was almost laughable, but more than anything, it was draining. I blocked her number, needing to close that chapter for good. Amidst it all, our mutual friends rallied around Lena and me, just as shocked by everything as we had been. Many reached out with support, and more than a few admitted they'd noticed subtle signs over time, but hadn't wanted to believe they were real. One friend, Brian, told me over coffee that he'd seen Juan acting overly familiar with Kira at a few gatherings, but had dismissed it as harmless. Now he apologized sincerely, promising to have my back and encouraging me to find happiness with Lena. Slowly, openly, Lena and I began dating. It felt different from anything I'd experienced before, like starting with a blank slate. There were no pretenses, no secrets, just two people who'd walked through fire and were ready for something genuine. The first time I held her hand in public, it felt unusual but right. Like the first real connection I'd had in a long time. We took long walks, sometimes talking about everything, sometimes just enjoying the quiet. And with each moment we spent together, the weight of the past lifted a little more. One evening, after a long day, we found ourselves curled up on my couch, her head on my shoulder, her fingers gently tracing circles on the back of my hand. The silence between us was easy, comforting, and I found myself savoring it. She looked up, her gaze warm but serious. "No more secrets, right?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. "None," I promised, my voice soft but steady. I was all in. We both knew the toll of hidden truths and how they could be lifted from the stoneholds of life. I didn't want any part of that life again, and I could see the same resolve in her eyes. As we walked hand in hand down the street one evening, the cool night air settling around us, it hit me just how far we'd come. We'd both been broken by people we once thought we'd spend forever with, yet here we were, stronger, building anew from the ashes. We stopped at the end of the street, a streetlight casting a soft glow, and I turned to her, feeling a sense of hope I hadn't felt in years. "Here's to new beginnings," I said, my voice filled with a conviction I hadn't realized I still had. She smiled, squeezing my hand. To trust, honesty, and finally letting go of the past. Together we walked forward, ready to leave the shadows of betrayal and heartbreak behind. This wasn't just a way to fill a void. It was something real, built on mutual respect, shared hardship, and a vow to avoid the mistakes our exes had made. For the first time in a long, long while, I was truly looking forward to whatever came next.